This is the second webinar in a series of co-design events to support councils in developing their workforce plans by the end of this year. So just a matter of housekeeping, as Jim just mentioned, we will be recording this session and making it available through the Engage Victoria website, so please just be aware of that. And like we're all getting used to with online forums, if you could please keep yourself on mute throughout the course of today, that would be great, unless you're speaking, and please raise your hand or use the chat function to pipe up as we go through today. So no one here will probably know me yet. Just to introduce myself, my name's Lucy Dalton and I'm the newly appointed Director or Acting Director of Policy and Strategy at Local Government Victoria, backfilling for Hannah Duncan Jones, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I've come to LGV from the precincts area of the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions. So I've been around in state government for quite a long time, but relatively new to the local government sector. I do, for my sins, I do have an urban planning degree, and so a bit of a background in sort of that aspect of local government, but I've been in this role for about 4 weeks so far and have quickly learned that that is like one of a zillion things that you guys are involved in. So thank you so much for taking the time today to come along to this and for all of your efforts in terms of the implementation of the 2020 Act. Before we get into the guts of today's webinar, I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any elders here today. So we might just run through the agenda for today quickly. We've got a bit to get through, and I'll throw over to Vidak shortly, who'll present an update of where we're up to with Local Government Act 2020 implementation. We will then go through the legislative requirements of a workforce plan and some key questions that might assist you guys in developing one. We've also got a great panel speaker. Well, it's not really a panel when it's one person. We've got a great speaker here today. So thank you, Amanda Wilson, who is the Executive Manager of People and Culture at Mount Alexander Shire, will be presenting to us regarding her experiences in workforce planning. And Amanda is also a key member of our workforce planning working group, which is fantastic. She's made great contributions there. And that working group is made up of representatives from across the sector working with LGV on nailing down what to include in a workforce plan and how we can share that with you guys once completed. So thank you, Amanda. And after we hear from her, there's plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So I think usually at these webinars, we normally have 2 speakers. We've just got the one today. So we'll see how we go for time, but you might get a little bit of time back in your day as well. Any questions or comments on the agenda today? No, great. So let's get into the overall project update for the implementation of the Act. Last month, we celebrated a significant milestone. So on the 1st of July this year, stage 4, which is the 4th and final stage of implementation, has commenced. I know it's been, I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment for the sector, and I'm sure it's been quite tricky working through this new legislative framework while we're also dealing with a pandemic and all sorts of other things. So again, well done to everyone who's been involved in various aspects of that. So there's a little bit more to do. Workforce planning is obviously one of the things that need to be completed by the end of this year, and that's what we're talking about today. But I'll hand over to Vidak now, who'll give a more general update about project implementation. Thanks, Vidak.
Hi everyone, for those who haven't met me, my name is Fadak and I started a few months ago here in the LGV team as project manager of the implementation of the Local Government Act, and I think I've met some of you, so nice to see you again. Just to go through an implementation update, and this won't be new to many of you, but the implementation of the Act is overseen by a Project Control Board, which comprises of key stakeholders, including peak body representatives from local government, as well as CEOs from local government organisations. The board meets monthly and it sets the strategic direction for the implementation, and it does provide approval of project plans and comms and engagement methodologies to LGV as we progress through implementation. And this structure was set up early in the project implementation with the purpose of ensuring that the sector is the leader of the implementation of the Act. So looking at this diagram, it's really remarkable to see how much work has been done in the sector in such a relatively short period of time. Since our last LGV Connects in July, we have completed stage 3A. So today I'll just give you an update on how we're progressing for stages 3B and 4. As you can see on the diagram, we are currently in stage 3B, which includes the establishment of an integrated strategic planning and reporting framework by the 31st of October of this year. And just to give a bit of background, LGV provided support for councils regarding the framework through a co-design process that ran from August to October in 2020. So this co-design process included a workshop series, a number of webinars, and a key survey just to get feedback from the sector and really to have the sector lead some of this work and support. Out of that process, LGV developed a draft reporting framework, and that was put to councils for consideration and consultation and feedback. And then we used that feedback to refine the framework, which has now been sectioned into key parts and published on our LGV website for easy use of councils. In relation to stage 4, you'll see that we have kicked off some key projects to support the implementation. The first one that we've completed has been the complaints policy, where we have recently worked with the Victorian Ombudsman to develop a guide on complaints handling, which we hope will support councils in their development of a complaints policy. And we've promoted this guide widely, and it's currently available on our resources webpage on our LGV website. In relation to the land regulations components of stage 4, we are currently working on developing key fact sheets that will provide support to councils in relation to changes in the Act that impact land regulations. These fact sheets will provide information that councils might need in relation to land regulations, specifically changes in the Act that impact carrying out works on land, requirements of providing land information or certificates, council powers in relation to land, unpaid money, rights and obligations, as well as changes in local laws. So do keep an eye out on our implementation matters newsletters. That's where we will be able to share our fact sheets on those topics, as well as through our Engage Vic and LGV websites. And in relation to our staff code of conduct and recruitment policy, these pieces of work we hope will be looked at within the workforce planning working group, who will hopefully be able to advise LGV on the best support that's required for councils in this area. In relation to CEO employment and remuneration policy, LGV is currently collating examples of recently completed or developed remuneration policies that we can share widely with the sector as examples that can support councils in developing their own policy. And finally, in relation to workforce planning, the workforce planning working group that was recently set up by LGV is currently working together to look into the support that councils might require as they set up their own workforce plan. And I'll be able to give a more detailed update in the next couple of slides. And finally, just to help us better understand how the sector is progressing with the implementation of this work, we're currently designing a survey that aims to really capture how councils are tracking in the implementation activities so that we can assess any critical pain points and be able to provide any assistance or guidance that councils might require in the implementation process. Now, I'll just quickly take you through workforce planning as it relates to the LGV Act. And sorry, may I ask if you're speaking to put yourself on mute? Just getting some feedback. Thank you. So as you know, councils are a significant contributor to the Victorian economy, employing over 50,000 people and spending more than $7 billion on service delivery. And the challenge for workforce planners will be to how to develop a plan that meets the requirements of the Act, as well as the needs of the council and more broadly the community. The Act recognises that effective workforce planning is at the heart of integrated strategic planning and service delivery. But as the Act is principle-based and has made effort to move away from the old style that's prescriptive, it doesn't really tell councils what every council, what every organisation needs for that. What we would be doing there is that's really up to each individual organisation and CEO to decide, because the specific local requirements, challenges and objectives for each individual council will vary, and that will also impact the kind of requirements that your individual plan might have or need. However, the Act does acknowledge the need for a workforce plan that can be integrated with other important strategic documents. And as you can see from the diagram, the workforce plan is one of 3 medium-term resource planning documents, along with the budget and ratings and revenue plan, which is really intended to be a live document that councils can continue to build on and update. So as you know, as discussed in our workforce planning gender equality webinar in May 2021, as Lucy mentioned, that was the first webinar we held in relation to workforce planning. There are several performance measures under the Gender Equality Act. And these measures should be considered as part of the workforce plan. But as you can see in the top figure, that there are elements in the Gender Equality Act that can be incorporated into the workforce plan. And LGV has been working in this area through facilitating the Gender Equality Advisory Committee, which aims to drive gender equality across Victoria's 79 councils, including delivering on the government target of 50% female mayors and councillors by 2025. And my colleague Evelyn is on the call, and she does coordinate and support that committee. And as the work of that committee progresses, we'll continue to provide information and updates through implementation matters and the LGV website and newsletter. Evelyn, is there anything, if you were there, is there anything that you wanted to flag or mention to the group in relation to this?
Thanks, Vadak. Yeah, just to mention the Gender Equality Advisory Committee, it has set up a working group that's looking at sort of recommendations in relation to future workforce planning, capacity building, that kind of thing. But that's a long-term piece of work. That's not for the immediate. It's strategy sort of going forward over the next few years. And in terms of the Gender Equality Act, LGV meets regularly with the team implementing the Act, and we hear good things in terms of how councils are going with developing their gender equality action plans and other aspects. So hopefully that's the case for all of you. And yeah, happy to hear more about that as the session continues. Thanks, Vadak.
Thank you, Evelyn. And quickly looking at what the Act itself requires, Section 46, subsection 4 outlines the requirements of a workforce plan. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have seen this already, but just to flag, it needs to be a plan of at least a 4-year duration, and it must contain the structure of the organisation, a projection of staffing requirements for the next 4 years, and defining measures and targets for equity and diversity. As you know, the workforce plan is due by the 31st of December. And as we mentioned earlier, the Act itself provides guidance on a number of core elements of a workforce plan, but not the exact and prescriptive parameters that meet each individual council needs, and that will be up to you individually to decide. And just to note, LGV is well aware that not all councils will have the resources available to deliver a best practice workforce plan on the first go, and that's we acknowledge that will be a challenge for some. And as you know, the Integrated Strategic Planning and Reporting Framework is a cycle of work, and we hope that the sector will continue to build on its expertise with each iteration of the plan and continue to evolve and build on the first plan. But to meet the more immediate needs, LGV is currently facilitating that working group, which I'll give you some detail about now. So coordinated by LGV, the workforce planning working group met 4 times this year and reconvened in July, where we've held, we've used a brainstorming session or structure of the workshop to hear more about what could be council pain points, so that LGV can support with those. Some of the things that were raised, and the main point that was raised was around what to include in the plan, particularly the foundational workforce plan that can be built on in future years and how that can look like. So we're currently working through a larger list that we hope to condense, and at the end of that exercise, hoping to produce a checklist or a list of items so that can help other councils in developing their work plans. The other point that was raised was around data gathering, including what type of data is required in the planning stage, and a number of members discussed using environmental scans as a type of exercise to help them commence their planning process. So just to give you an idea of what the working group has been discussing and working on. And the next meeting for the working group is currently set up for next week, the 26th of August. And again, we hope to produce a more succinct list that we can share with you. That's all from me. Back to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Vadak. Sorry, just having issues with my headset there. Sorry, and I'm popping in and out. Thank you for that update, Fadak. That was really useful. Does anyone have any comments or questions on any of that before I introduce Amanda?
Yes, hi. Just on the working group there, I was wondering if you have any timelines on when we can sort of get some further direction in terms of what the outcomes look like for this round.
Good question, Lima. We hope that in our next meeting we'll be able to have a more condensed list, and then we'll be able to have a clearer idea of when we'll be able to publish material further. But if you would like, I'm happy to get in touch with you offline and perhaps update you on what we've got so far, if that will be helpful with your planning. But we're thinking that next week, the next session we have next week will give us a clear idea of what our timelines are, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Fadak. And there was a similar comment from Elizabeth Roberts in the chat. So maybe if you could loop back to both of them. But I think,
Sure.
yeah, so that conversation's happening next week. And then we've obviously got our various channels, whether it's implementation matters or other things. I'm still learning what all of the channels are. That would be good. Okay, there's a few other questions popping up in the chat. I think we might loop back to those towards the end, and I'll let Amanda kick off her presentation. So it is my pleasure to introduce Amanda to speak next. As I said, she's the Executive Manager of People and Culture at Mount Alexander Shire. She has extensive experience in workforce planning both in New South Wales and Victoria. In New South Wales, Amanda played a key role in workforce planning during the 2016 amalgamations, which I'm sure would have been an interesting time. Prior to local government, she has worked in the private sector and in the not-for-profit sector, including at Tennis Australia and the Cancer Council. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Amanda. And are we swapping presentations for that?
Yes.
Yep. So I'll give you a moment to get your screen all sorted. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thanks for the introduction, Lucy, and thanks for having me along today, everyone. Let me just see if I can successfully manage to share my screen here. So the introduction is probably quite nice that you mentioned the experience from New South Wales, because that was an interesting time for certain. We arrived at work one day at 9 o'clock, and at 12 o'clock we were announced that our councils no longer existed and we were a new entity. So we had two councils that were amalgamated, and I was tasked with finding a way through for a new structure and a workforce plan to ensure that people fit somewhere, and we also met really tight deadlines for the New South Wales government to demonstrate we were meeting their new requirements. So hopefully you're going to see what I can see. Okay, so I'll just acknowledge before I move into some of the slides that I definitely understand that everybody here is going to be at a different level. We might have some people who are really quite well advanced, and you may already have an existing workforce plan that's quite well developed. And then others, and I understand this having worked in rural and regional areas, that often resources and other factors mean that we likely have a lot of this information, but it may just not be in the format that's required. So what I'm going to do is just really bring this back to basics and put forward some of the things that I've used in the past and currently to make sure that these basics are really what's needed for all of us to be compliant with the Act. So it might not necessarily be suited to your council, but hopefully it might give you a few things to think about. Okay, so just in terms of the overall process for workforce planning, as most of you would be aware, you've really got your starting point and bringing things into alignment so you know what you're working with before you move into your workforce analytics, with looking at what your workforce is now, what it needs to be in the future, and really bridging that gap to establish what actions you need for implementation. So really for today, I'm just going to focus on the workforce analytics and a little bit in implementation. So FDAC has mentioned a number of these already, but in terms of some of the documents, if you haven't already had a look at them, I'd suggest things around what you currently have in your council plan and the strategies and commitments going forward, looking at what's in the budget, and that was going to help you determine what the future workforce fundamental requirements are. And from the workforce analytics, it really is looking at how you get from point A to point B. This data is already going to exist in your, whether it's in your human resource management system, your payroll system, or through some of the other processes that you already have in place. So that gap analysis is going to help you through. Then obviously once you reach your implementation stage, you're going to communicate the plan and put these actions into place. And I think it was FDAC that also mentioned too that for between now and December, there's 3 months. So probably my approach and my advice is this is going to be an ongoing thing in which we can review. So we don't have to have absolutely everything in it right now. Okay. So getting started, I would suggest that your key stakeholders to engage, consult, and get an understanding from them is really your senior leaders. So whether it's managers, executive, coordinators, they will know their areas of work better than anyone. And there's a fair chance that most of them have a really clear path about what's not working and what they think will actually help their area. So I always recommend, and I found it very, very helpful in the past, that they will be able to almost give you a guide to what's needed. The council plan, as I said, that's going to give you your objectives for the next 4 years, and the budget implications will come from that as well. So the work that you're doing with the Gender Equality Action Plan is most definitely going to tie into this, and your organisational structure must be included as a part of the Act requirements. And that, again, there's no guidance as to what should be included. It may be high level in that, it's just the roles or the work units that you need to include. But other things that you might want to consider is looking at around your employee demographics, your team structures, performance reviews, development plans, and your staff turnover. And as I said, you've probably got all of this information somewhere. It's really just consolidating it into an actual plan. Okay, so if we are looking at what the current profile is, you can approach this in any way you like, but what I've particularly found useful in the past is splitting this out into an analysis spreadsheet. And you basically just have a column and you can consider everything from gender, age, diversity measures, education levels, your length of service, and the FTE as well. And if you are, I suppose, a little bit more advanced, you might even already have skills profiles where, as a part of your annual reviews, you know what existing skills and qualifications each of your staff members have and what they want to do in the future. So you might want to include that, but again, I won't go into too much detail. It's just something else to consider. If you have it there, you may wish to use it now, and if not, you can most definitely use it in the future. So anything that's really giving you a pattern or a trend currently, if your organisation does something like, we call them quarterly health checks, you might call it something different. All of those stats are really helpful, that if you've already seen patterns as well, that you think, gosh, everyone's leaving after a year, or why are we always recruiting to this area? And it's not something like, I suppose, our challenge areas of planners and engineers and building surveyors that's so common in local government. You might want to have that as a bit more of a focus area. But again, I would definitely suggest that your managers, coordinators, they're going to be the ones that know what those challenging areas are. If you have retirement plans, or you have a pattern of, staff who are leaving at a certain point in their career as well, and whether that's for advancement or they're moving to, I guess from a country perspective, if they're moving from rural or regional to urban, that might be something you would like to look at as well. So essentially it can be anything that you want it to be, but as long as you're able to extract your organisational structure and some demographics to at least be able to have a talk to each unit or area, they'll be able to provide some really, really good insights for you. Okay, as I said, senior leaders, if you are going to go and meet with your senior leaders, what I thought I would do is just put down some questions just for consideration. And all of this at the end of the day is just for consideration, but it has worked for me in the past on a couple of occasions. So I've kind of gone with the same method and just tweaked it along the way. But some of the typical questions that I tend to ask when I sit down with the managers of each unit are really around, what's working well now and what's not at the end of the day. So I put some suggestions there around, will the way that you're doing your work, is that expected to change going forward? Or are you looking at making any changes? Are we expecting any differences in the service delivery? And that might be, some managers might already be considering, taking on additional clients or expanding the service through bringing in additional staff. So that's something we should be aware of in the HR space, but noting some councils are choosing to have, I suppose, more of a data analytic type role assist in this as well. So in terms of the current employees, you might like to ask, what kind of skills do they already have? Have they indicated they'd like to try something different in the future? And if they do need that, that might be something we can look at for training. And will the workload change? So ultimately, are we going to need fewer, less employees? What does that look like? So
Amanda, can I just jump in very quickly?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're seeing the same slides that you're talking to. So we're still seeing the workforce analysis slide, is that correct?
You should be seeing a bunch of dot points with questions. What are you seeing?
No. So we're seeing slide number 5, workforce analysis, where it's on the view that shows the slides down the left-hand side where your mouse is. It's not actually on the presentation.
Thank you. I think I've only managed to go a couple of slides ahead. So let me just exit out of that and I will attempt again. Now, can you see a different slide now, slide 6?
Yes, but the screen that you're sharing with us is the screen that has it with where your mouse is and the slides all along the left-hand side. It's not in presentation mode, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's sharing on a different monitor for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad you told me it's slide 5 and not slide 15. Let me just have a quick look.
So which is fine. It's easy to see if you just want to keep doing it manually rather than in presentation mode. That might be the simplest.
Second.
Happy to jump in whilst that's happening. Quickly, just to answer your question, Kylie, about the CEO remuneration policy, which we're collating a number of example policies that we've currently located, and we'll add those to our resources webpage in the coming weeks. So please keep an eye out on our Implementation Matters newsletter, where we will give an update of when that's ready and published.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. Appreciate it.
And thanks, Amanda. That's looking good now.
Thank you very much. Okay, so they are the questions that I was just talking through there that you might like to consider as a part of if you are intending to have input from executive or leadership around what they think that their individual areas need, to feed that into, I suppose, an overall view and way forward for your council. I really like this diagram. Somebody showed this to me a number of years ago, where you are trying to essentially deliver something that is moving from really a point A to a point B, but somehow along the way, with everything else that seems to be feeding into it, it really ends up looking like the bottom part of that diagram. So as a part of a gap analysis, if you may have, I know some councils have Tech One implemented where there is actually a workforce analytic component to that. So you might already be able to really cross-pollinate some of your data that you have. If not, if you don't already, a really good way that I found to do that is through a really basic spreadsheet for gap analysis. And that's looking at what we've learned from our current workforce, what we need for our future workforce, and how we're going to get there. So really breaking it down into 3 areas, I always look at what new expertise, if any, do we actually need? And overall, what's actually changing? So there could be many things, but I try and break it right back down to just those really key things that are going to change in terms of staffing levels, service delivery, or anything else that's been flagged as a crucial element. And you may then look at what's also not included as well. So again, I've probably talked through most of these points already. Industry trends is always an interesting one, particularly, as I said, if we're looking at strategies that are around, recruiting and retention, industry trends, I'm sure nobody's going to disagree with me. And if you do, please let me know how on earth you are recruiting engineers and planners and building surveyors, which are incredibly difficult to find at the best of times. Really looking at the way that the work's being done, and does anything need to change? Sometimes after a period of time, we fall into ways of doing things because it's the way we've always done it, but it's also an opportunity to have a bit of a mini service review with your managers as you work through this. And again, that's looking at programs, services, what's getting increased, what's getting decreased. And do we have the necessary skills? And that can really very much tie into some of the things I've got in one of my next slides, is around the strategies that you might like to look at. And again, these don't need to be included. I'm including them because this is how it makes sense for me to break these down. So when I've looked at our current workforce, our future workforce, what needs to happen to actually get there to bridge that gap, that's where I break it down into these essentially strategies. So I break recruitment out as a separate strategy. And I look at everything from the ways that we're recruiting. Do we need to look at trainees? Do we need to look at apprentices? Who do we actually have coming into the organisation? Look at selection as well. So who is actually applying, and also who is on our selection panels, that they are also, they're skilled, they're capable, they know what we actually need and why, and they're also thinking about the future, not just filling the role right here and now. I separate retention out as a separate area to look at as well, and I look at not just turnover rates, but I also look at why people leave us. And I get all of this information from our exit surveys, which is a survey they complete and also an exit interview. And for us, it's people going to a better opportunity. And that's great that they have got the experience and they've now taken a coordinator role or a manager role elsewhere. So retention and how that ties in to some of our future areas like staff development and succession planning, they all tie together, but again, split them out. So staff development, I'll look at that through what can we do to build capacity, how do we retain that corporate knowledge? And that's the same for succession planning as well, looking at what we have in terms of, I suppose, employees who may be likely moving into retirement and what we can put in place now to provide the opportunities and also let them phase out as they wish to do so. And probably my absolute number one tip through all of this is just keep the strategies manageable. We can always change them down the path. They can change each time you're reviewing them, but just keep what you're doing manageable so that you are actually getting some small wins along the way, and you've met the act, you've got your small wins, and you start to get buy-in from the organisation. So it's not too overwhelming. You've started off, if you're at the starting point, in something that's really quite achievable. So I won't probably go into too much into this area, but when you do get around to gathering all of that data and you've got your strategies in place about how you're getting there, I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but ensuring that you've got that support from executive and senior leadership, so this is filtering from the top down right throughout the organisation, is absolutely paramount. Obviously, looking at the resources you need to, first of all, create this, but also deliver your strategies. Again, roles, responsibilities, timelines, all of that. Again, if you have a sophisticated system, you will already have this. If it's your starting point, even breaking it down into a table that looks something like this. So you've got your strategy, and that might be, improving your recruitment, or attracting more experienced and suitable candidates, for example. So your action might be, you're going to start advertising at, different methods or different forums. You're going to engage a recruiting firm, something like that. And your measures and your milestones might be around obtaining more applicants, or a percentage of applicants that do meet every one of your KPIs or your key selection criteria in the PD. So that's just a really simple way of doing it, that might provide, I suppose, some achievable and more simple things that you can tick off as you move into the first year of having your workforce plan in place. So once you get through the implementation just after the 31st of December, it really is about reviewing, assessing and adjusting as you go forward. So again, ask yourself and leadership along the way, have our organisation strategies changed? And you all know this too, you might have a change of someone in executive, a new director comes in, a new CEO comes in, new council, everything's sort of changing, shifting, the goalposts have moved. So it might not be relevant, you might need to make changes. Has anything really impacted your budget? Have you lost funding that you thought you were going to have? Has something else happened that has lost, a large portion of your funds? And are the assumptions that you made when you were looking at what currently is happening, what needs to happen in the future, is that still valid? It's always worth just checking back. And has there been any changes that require a review of your strategies overall? So again, that's not until later down the track, but just closing out the full cycle and how I've worked through it in the past. So that is a very, I suppose, high-level review of an overview of what I've actually done in that space. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions about any of the specifics. And if anyone did ever want to chat about data analytics offline, I am a bit of a data nerd, so I'm more than happy to have any of those conversations or bounce any ideas around as well.
Thanks so much, Amanda. That was a super comprehensive overview. And I guess I might just ask the obvious question before I allow people to, please pop your hand up if you've got anything you'd like to raise, or we can pull things from the chat as discussed earlier. But presumably, will we be circulating these slides to people? Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine, not a worry at all.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Amanda? Kirsty.
Thanks, Amanda. That was great. I was just wondering, in your workforce plan, whether you're going to, how far into the detail you're going to get, as in when you're putting in your budgeted forecasted EFT, are you going to identify, each we're going to need additional X roles, or are you just using your budget for that?
I am breaking it down into areas. And the reason that I'm doing that is because for us at Mount Alex, and I'm not doing it for, probably not for every area, but the areas that we need additional budget resources and the funding we've received to deliver projects, it's very much focused within our infrastructure area. So for us, that infrastructure comes up in virtually every area of our strategy. So I will be breaking it down in that area.
But not across the whole organisation.
No. So I've gone with an overarch for the whole organisation, but then I've split it out that these are the challenges and this is our focus area.
Thank you.
No worries.
And while others are thinking about formulating questions, perhaps I'll just draw everyone's attention to the link that Jim has posted in the chat, where you can subscribe to our Implementation Matters mailing list, which is probably the best way to get the up-to-date notifications when we do sort of post examples and resources and things on our website. And
I might ask a question, Amanda. What was key for you in the iterative approach, and as you built on your regional plan, what are some of the things that you kept in mind or kept reviewing or looking at? I know you had your review slide, but if you can share some reflections on, you know, what you did throughout the year, what you had in mind as sort of high-level pieces of work or parameters.
Absolutely. Probably the one thing for me, for DAC, is that Mount Alex has been probably a different organisational approach to what I've used in the past. But in terms of what I suppose myself and my HR team identified as what we thought were priorities and what executive actually thought were priorities and requirements in each area, it was so interesting in actually going out to engage with the leadership team and the managers. Those two expectations and what everyone's seen as challenges were actually different. So had I not actually gone out to have those conversations with the managers of the units, I don't think what I had in the workforce plan originally as our strategy and our gap analysis would have been fully on the mark. And interestingly, so for example, our manager of community wellbeing, she had already had a number of ideas about how we can really engage with the local community and school leavers about a pathway program for school leavers coming into the direct care worker space, because it's a constant problematic area for us. And she already actually had put a lot of thought into what she would like to do, but had struggled to find, I suppose, a good pathway of how it fed into everything else. So we've now been able to incorporate that into really what the workforce plan now includes is an overall, I suppose, locally based targeted recruitment strategy, really engaging with the local high schools to get a pathway for school leavers, year 10, year 12, and have them come into our organisation. Because for us, our longest term staff members are those that are local. And when I've looked at the data, and which I really hadn't until this process, our retention is locally based people. Being rural, we will find that all the data showed that, again, I probably sound like I'm traumatised by planners and engineers, but they mostly come from metro councils. They will stay for about 18 months, is usually their max time. They get the experience, then they go back to a higher role. So we're really looking, so we're going to implement a trainee pathway so that we can have people come in, hopefully stay longer term.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a fantastic outcome to be able to tackle two things in one. That's really great. Thank you, Amanda.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. That was a really great presentation and really useful insights. I don't think we've got any more questions, but lots of praise and gratefulness for sharing your experiences in the chat. So thank you. And for that, we might move on to the next thing. We'll close it out. I think it's just a reminder about the next LGV Connects webinar, which is on the 14th of October. Do we have a topic for that yet, Fadak?
We do. It's a tentative topic, close to confirming, but we are hoping to have a very exciting speaker to be confirmed. So please look out for our Implementation Matters newsletter, but we're looking for the topic to focus on complaints handling and support for councils and their complaints handling policy. So I think a very exciting session coming forward. But Jim has shared the link. Please join our Implementation Matters newsletter so you can receive those updates and hopefully continue to join us for future sessions.
Thank you. And then just before we close out, just a reminder that a recording of this session will be placed on the Engage Vic website, and we will share it through that Implementation Matters newsletter. So if there's anyone you know that you think might benefit from hearing Amanda's presentation, you can share that with them. So thanks everyone, and an extra 5 minutes back in your day.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Amanda. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Really helpful. Thank you.